Are you ready to change Russian literature forever?
Am I? I think I am.
I am too. That's why we got big things coming.
We got big things coming.
Big things.
Mm.
I'm bearing the lead.
Well, let's start with, who are you? Who am I talking to?
This is behind the scenes Bezukhov, your host, your co-host, beloved Matt Gerasimovich.
And I'm Cameron Lalana, and we are, if I can be fully frank with you, fresh off of finishing the epilogues for War and Peace.
Fresh off it.
And we're going to, I don't know if Matt turned his fan on. I'm going to apologize for the drop in quality. I opened a window in here. Normally wouldn't for sound reasons, but holy God, it is so hot. It's 90 degrees in the Central Valley. I'm running a desktop computer. It is so unbelievably hot in this room. I'm sorry, it's a bonus episode. I'm not going to maintain the usual standard of quality.
You get scraps.
You get scraps. So, this is our wrap-up episode. We finished War and Peace. If you are here, if you've been listening, thank you for listening through War and Peace. That was a doozy. That was a big one. That was a big, almost 6-monther.
Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah.
Felt longer, honestly. But we did it.
We did it. We got through it.
Yep.
So if you haven't listened to that yet, go back, listen to every single episode. It's very worthwhile. Read the book if you have it, or look it up online.
And then listen to every single episode.
Right. Or, if you have that question, listen to every single episode, then read the book, then read every single episode, read it concurrently, however you want to do it. Either way, any way is fine.
I got an email from someone today actually asking if I knew of any other Russian literature podcasts that go chapter by chapter through War and Peace. Not just because the person wanted it, but because they have kids and family situation that prohibits them from reading long chunks at once. But I was like, you are sick if you really want us to talk about every chapter and that you would listen to that. That's an amazing testament to me.
Complete full support for this listener.
I know.
If you want us to change this podcast to be nothing but one chapter of War and Peace for literally years on end, we'll do that for you.
That was actually my original idea for this podcast. Was to do chapter by chapter.
Oh, that'd be a hell of a podcast. We would be about here, and I don't think we'd be done with War and Peace.
I know.
In terms of our podcast history.
Yeah. But speaking of podcast history, original ideas, things we want to do, we got stuff coming up.
We got some stuff. Let's start with not the big one. Let's start with the most imminent one, which is that today is, if all goes well, May 31st, and we are about to start our June break, meaning that we will not be posting any new episodes through June. We're going to be taking off. We got some time to get it. We need some time to get ahead, to start planning for some stuff, to do some things which we will talk about later in this episode, and also just take a break because it's been a big one.
Yeah, we need a break from making episodes, and we need the time to do everything that falls through the cracks over the 5 months when we're doing the podcast.
Right. Yeah. So we'll be gone from new content, but we won't be entirely gone because we're still going to be posting actually all 4 weeks. And Matt, if I can ask you, what are we going to be doing instead of our normal new content?
So there are a few episodes that we have made over the years that we are very proud of and that we think deserve a little more attention from our viewers. And these are often episodes that came out kind of earlier in the podcast. So I don't know, maybe they just got buried. Maybe they're just not as searched for, terms, but you'll see them as they come out. They are episodes that we highly recommend that you listen to, and that if you're thinking of something to read over the summer, we recommend that you pick up these books or short stories that we're going to be, re-releasing these episodes for.
Yeah. Yep. And I look forward to it because these were all, when we were kind of thinking about what should we release, all came to mind instantly for us. So I would say we're pretty proud of them if that was the case. But anywho.
Yeah. And we just, again, want to reiterate how much we also personally enjoyed these. These are not just some of these are kind of, it's not that they're I feel like sometimes some of the things we toe the line between enjoyment and scholarly interest.
Right.
I feel like all of these were enjoyment for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Which is not to denigrate their quality or anything like that. It's just pure endorsement for these.
Yeah. So
am I doing a good job selling?
I think you're doing a great job. I'm sold. I mean, I was already sold, but I'm even more sold now. So
yeah, we've never done reruns of anything, but we figured why take the month completely off when we have some good things kind of sitting unlistened to?
Which deserves some time. So keep an eye out for that, and we will be back with new content on July 7th. And we got some good stuff coming back on July 7th. But fear not, we're not just taking this month off, take it easy. We got some plans. Matt, what are our plans? And, vague detail. We can't give too much away.
Yeah, we have our next long series picked out. More details to come on that. It will not be starting the first month we're back, but rather the month after. We have some kind of changes to the way that we're going to be going about doing, first of all, everything on the podcast, but I will just briefly address long series. They are not going to be stacked one after the next for months at a time. We did not think this was conducive for new listeners coming into the podcast to start on seeing the newest episode being War and Peace Part 14. We thought that would be a little bit off-putting. And also, honestly, maybe you don't want to be around listening to War and Peace. And when we picked these series, well, shoot, you're out of luck for 6 months. So we're going to be breaking them up and we're going to be covering them over longer. The episodes are going to come out like once a month. And in between, we're going to go back to doing other episodes of things that we really want to do. That's the new focus of the podcast.
Yeah.
Is doing things that we want to do. There are a series of things that we really want to do that we have not done, and now is the time.
I think I was listening to this podcast recently. I only listened to the Mountain Goats, and the artist who leads the Mountain Goats, John Darnielle, expressed it very well, which is that when you're young as a musician, at least in his experience, people want to play very fast because they're afraid if they go slowly, they lose people's attention, so they want to be up-tempo, upbeat, constantly catching everyone's attention. And as you mature more as a musician, you realize that people are sticking around for you. You become more comfortable sitting with the song, making a slower song, and feel comfortable people are going to stick with you through that. And I think we're nearly 3 years into this podcast. We're a little more comfortable with not.
And I actually think after that, he goes on to say that eventually you reach a point where people will sit and listen to you monologue about Vasily Grove and Stalingrad. Right. I think that was the next part.
That is how the podcast ends. So I think at this point we've been around long enough that we don't feel the need to all right, we really have to cover whatever Anacrin and A War and Peace. We've done some of the bigger stuff, and we still want to do the bigger stuff, but also there's a lot of small stuff we don't get to cover along the way, which is, I guess I will say another reason. So let's talk about our format, because there's three basic things we're going to be talking about here, which is when we go forward, a bit of a format change, as Matt has been alluding to. Secondarily, a bit of a branding change, and then finally, a bit of a I guess it's more so branding and formatting. So let's start with formatting. We're going to be still continuing with big series. We like doing that. We want to include that under the banner of just other stuff we want to cover, short stories, books, without sacrificing. I think this is a nice balance of maybe doing one episode per month of our big series, and then doing two other episodes, which are maybe a short story, maybe a context, maybe us just covering an idea, a little bit more freeform than what we've been doing so far, because there's a lot of content which frankly we cover maybe in one episode and then don't come back to because it's maybe specific to that author or maybe specific to a time period or a genre or whatever that we don't cover all that often. And we want to have the freedom to be able to cover these things more often in a way that, is a bit more comprehensive, gives us a bit more time to research these ideas individually rather than having to have knowledge about an author or an idea or an era every episode. And given our pretty busy lives, we think this will be a format which will allow us to continue, if a bit slower in terms of how much we're covering, we'll continue offering high quality educational content going forward. That's still worthwhile, and also hopefully a bit more approachable. We've gotten feedback that we're a good podcast, and we like to believe that's true, but we could be a bit more approachable. So one of the things we want to do is be more approachable, and also be a bit more inclusive. I think traditionally this study can be pretty, and I know we're Russian literature, and we'll talk about that in a second, but Russian dominant and also dominant in terms of men. And that is something that has always been in the back of our minds, something we want to address. And I think for too long, we've maybe not addressed that as much as we should have. And that is a goal going forward a bit more actively. So before we go into that too much, I think it'll make more sense if in the context of the branding redo. So, Matt, I'll toss it over to you on that as our resident branding specialist.
Yes, we have been working with some very smart and experienced people to help us basically reevaluate the kind of future of the podcast. And all this kind of comes out of this feeling of just kind of being a little stuck, feeling a little samey, feeling like as we were going through War and Peace, even though we liked the product, we didn't step away from it every episode feeling like we were ecstatic with it or that it was like exactly what we wanted to do. And so we sought out some help trying to think about how we can kind of not like redo the show. I mean, the gist of it is still going to be the same, but we are going to be really focused more on Slavic literature, just a little more generally. We're trying to kind of be more inclusive of the region, start considering like Central Asia a little bit more. There are really just a lot of countries with really rich literary traditions that we feel like we should help kind of, expose our audience to, because we think that you would like them. And we like them. And so we think you will too. And so kind of going along with that, we're going to, try to bring a little bit more depth to some of these episodes. I get a lot of emails, just like today. I had actually a few messages on Tolstoy and people that are looking for further reading, which is so awesome. I can't believe there are so many people that want to read more after reading War and Peace. That's great. But that's kind of what we want to help you all do, is not read more, but expose you to what else is there. Like what do other people think that are not just us? And that is actually quite easy for me because that is what I do for a job. And so that, sometimes the podcast feels like it takes away from what I'm doing, but this is a way for me to kind of merge what I'm already doing with kind of podcast content to make it, I think, more interesting and I think deeper. And I think that this is, not to hop on bandwagon trend, but this tends to be the way that I see this sort of group of podcasts that we seek to emulate or to be associated with going. We don't want to be just associated with drinking and rereading things. That's not exactly what we had intended. And so we're steering to be more critical, more wholesome, not wholesome in that way. Wholesome,
holistic, maybe.
As holistic. There you go. Yeah, more holistic. And more, inclusive, not just in the sort of DE&I sort of way, but just in our, in our methodology and who we choose to cover and basically everything. It is kind of a foundational aspect of what we're trying to do with the podcast. And we just thought that, to let the cat out of the bag, that Tipsy Tolstoy as a brand, as a name, wasn't doing it for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to be entirely overhauling everything, and you will start to see changes soon. Hopefully you like them. Just know that we like them, and we're incredibly excited to, unveil these and work under this name and work under, the new art that we're having commissioned and just everything. We got so much good stuff coming.
Yeah. And
I finally feel excited about the podcast again.
Yeah. And I think I want to reemphasize here that, in changing everything, when you look at the title, when you look at the art, and we're sad to see Tipsy Tolstoy go. The name is great. The art is great. The music is great. We love all these things.
Yes.
It was also very much a pandemic podcast. It was something that Matt and I started doing because we wanted to expose more people to Russian literature. But it was also something we did when we had an excess of time and we're frankly drinking more and just doing more inside stuff. And now that it's been years onward and now that both of us are busier and can't just frankly logistically drink as much, we want the podcast to kind of grow with us and with our lives. So not that we won't still be the same fun podcast, still having a good time, still joking around, still having entertaining content. Our goal is to, as always has been, to make this what we read not only understandable but also fun. We want to make this a good time, and we want this podcast to also not be stuck in who we were 2 years ago, and also let it grow with us. So in We think this is a good compromise between, we still want to be covering the big stuff, the big names you've heard of, still be doing that. We want to be able to make it match with how busy our lives are and still give you the same quality of content. And as has always been the case, we've always wanted to expand out from just Russian literature into other countries and cultures in the region, and also cover more, less talked about people, even in, Russian literature and also the other regions for whatever reason. That's always been the goal. So when we talk about our relaunch, I think for reasons that will probably be pretty apparent to everyone, you don't necessarily want to talk about non-Russian things in the title of Russian literature. That was pretty apparent 10 years ago, let alone now. So this is, I think, in a lot of ways, a realignment with kind of what we've always been intending from a beginner intro. Let's have fun with this more into. This is something we're looking into in the long haul, and we want to be able to have the podcast reflect that this is a serious engagement, which is taking what we do, not to be redundant here, we take what we do seriously, and we want to be able to cover what we think is fun, but also be able to cover beyond what you're going to be hearing in like Russian Literature 101 class. We want to go beyond that, and some of the most fun we've had is just with weird little stuff, and we want to be able to cover our weird little stuff in places that's not necessarily Russia, but also be hitting on the big notes that you'll be familiar with, and something that you'll still find useful, even if that's the other regions or other people are not necessarily what you're here for. Hitting all the basics that we want to be hitting. We think this is a nice compromise.
In this process of kind of reflecting and figuring out, at least for me, why was I not enthused with the future of the podcast? Which sounds kind of bad to say as the co-host, but honestly, it is how I started kind of feeling over the last few months, which is just like, I didn't want to do what we were doing again and again and again. I didn't see that as like a sustainable or quite frankly, even interesting to the listener kind of, podcast. And so one of these revelations, I guess, that we had, which maybe as a listener, you'll think, duh, it's just, I think we thought of ourselves as an entertainment first in a lot of ways podcast. And this is where, right, like incorporating drinking and, trying intentionally to make it like fun, which is not a quality we want to lose. But this sort of kind of conceptualization of our own work as entertainment first, education also kind of there. There was always this kind of battling for what should be the primary focus of the podcast, which, right, is we've come to conclude it is the educational aspect. It will still be fun. It will still be hopefully incredibly interesting. But I feel like excited to kind of lean into like being able to bring in more critical sources and being able to just bring in like different things into our work, because I think it's only going to make it stronger and make it more cohesive and just make it more interesting for us, which is going to inherently make it more interesting for you, the listener. So, you want to see how the sausage is made. That's it, baby.
Yeah, I mean, talking more to your point about being educational, not in the sense that we want to start being drier and less fun and less boisterous as we always are, but in terms of like really considering the educational aspect of the podcast of, hey, maybe, like we've said, there's a reason to revisit some ideas. Maybe, as is often the case, we need to hit on some ideas more than once, and there's value in doing that.
This sounds like really stupid, but sometimes we'll like do an episode and I'll kind of figure it out as we're going through it.
Mm-hmm.
And like, not that I'm not prepared, although sometimes I'm not prepared, but like generally I am. But what I want to think about more beforehand is like, what do I really want the listener to take away from this episode? And how can I gear this sort of knowledge that I have on secondary sources and just like freaking everything? I mean, I've been studying this for like a million years at this point, it feels like. And so how can I gear what I know and pare it down in a concise way that is actually going to sort of tell this story as we go through it? And I really want everyone to be able to take something away from each episode where it's not just feeling like a reread podcast, because that's right. Like, I do not want to be a reread podcast. I cannot say that enough. Someone like said that to us in a way, and I was like, "Ooh, I didn't think of us as a reread podcast. I don't know if I want to be thought of it like that."
Yeah, but that and as a feature of just being a podcast, we read something and then that's the episode. We covered that once or twice, or maybe even 12, 13 times as War and Peace may be the case. And that's not always good educational, just theory or practice. And so in our goal of being able to help bring knowledge to people and sometimes being a little bit more freeform, not without rules, not without expectations, but without the expectation that every single time we've got one single piece to cover, and that's what we're going to be covering. That gives us a bit more freedom to attack, a piece of knowledge which we want to convey a little bit more, whatever the case may be, whether it is our traditional style, whether it's focusing on something else, right? I think this will give us a lot more freedom to be more effective as a podcast.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking if this is coming out on May 31st, I would like to finalize this sort of listener survey that I've had kicking around for a while. We know where the podcast is going, but we do also really want your feedback. If you are still listening at this point in the podcast, we want your feedback.
Check out the show notes for a link.
In the show notes, top link is going to be there. It might be a little lengthy. I'll ask for your email and I'll shoot out, like a discount code or a free shipping code for some of the new merch that we're going to have to, make it up to you for your troubles.
Sure. Yeah. Little spending money. Not money, but
little spending money. Well, it's not really spending money. A little discount money from your spending money.
Right.
That's right.
A little money back in your pocket from the spending money.
A little money back. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would love to talk infinitely about all of our changes, and, maybe we will for, in the future once some of them are done. But a lot of them are still in flux, so I don't want to give away, I can't definitively say everything yet.
Right. To show behind the scenes, part of the reason for our June break this year, although it was always going to happen, is to give us time to really fully fully design the relaunch. We already have the basics, the outline, the ideas there, but to actually build it, that's what we'll be doing over June, and we haven't gotten there yet. So we will be able to unveil obviously more once it's done.
Yeah, you'll start to see things kind of trickle out through June. It's going to take us a little while to finalize everything, but we will be back and better than ever in July, hopefully.
Right. And it's, as always, it's a growing podcast. Things will take adjustments, and we will make adjustments. Some things will stay, some things will change. Maybe all of it will change. Maybe all of it will stay. Who knows? Our goal, as always, is to be an effective way to communicate knowledge that's also fun to listen to, and whatever it takes to get there, and whatever it takes to be something that we can keep doing along with our lives, that's how we're going to take it.
I think that's an important thought because, I'll just say it. I really, as we were kind of approaching this end of series, I was thinking, right, there were two ways we could go. We could shutter Tipsy Tolstoy completely, call it a day. We've covered Tolstoy's two main novels. We did it. We've gone, 2.5 years. That's longer than most podcasts by really any statistical evaluation, which Tolstoy loves, as you know. We're, in a top whatever percentage of podcasts, which sounds very, very impressive. We've accomplished a lot, and we're eternally grateful that we've had, this opportunity. And it felt like a great spot where you could just kind of shutter the podcast. But I didn't really want to do that. I like the podcast.
That's good. And there's also just so much stuff we didn't get to cover. So many weirder, smaller things that people don't generally talk about. I mean, half of our replan was just us kind of yelling over the phone of like, why doesn't anyone ever cover this? This is a big book. This is important. This is, if we want to go outside of literature, maybe this movie, why does no one ever, if I can maybe let a spoiler go, if we want to talk about Tarkovsky, of all these people on podcasts talking about Tarkovsky, he wrote a fucking book about it. He wrote a book explaining what he meant. Why does no one talk about this in relation to his movies?
Okay, when you say all these people, there's like 3 people that have ever talked about him.
Right, so
yeah.
I'm taking this from, sorry, this is a Matt side of things, but whatever, the people who have, right, there's literature, there's scholarship on it. Why aren't we talking about the literature and scholarship on it? There's all these things we realize we want to be covering, which frankly don't jive with our current format. So how do we bring the knowledge we want to be talking about into the format? And so the format kind of had to change.
And with it, the name and the brand and quite frankly everything.
Right. As someone did point out to us, it is not at all apparent by our art or our name, despite the fact we do love them and will miss it dearly.
Yes.
Very, very dearly. That was a hard conversation to have, real hard on our part. It really does not explain what we're about. And to their point, people looking at your name or art and figuring out, oh, this is what this podcast is going to cover, is pretty important.
Could be important.
Yeah.
It's quite frankly amazing we have the listenership that we do based on the fact that we did not do a good job at that.
Our branding is horrible, but hey, I still love it. We still love it. It's going to live on in our hearts forever.
I don't think it's horrible, but I do think it could be improved upon. Like you said, for clarity's sake.
It's all good stuff, just maybe not clear. But
exactly.
I think we talked about it enough. I think not everyone is as interested in how the sausage is made. So unless there's anything else you want to cover, I think we can let our listeners go there.
No, I'm good. The music used for the last time in this episode was Soviet March by Toasted Tomatoes. You can find more of their stuff on toastedtomatoes.bandcamp.com and also on YouTube under the same username. You should definitely go show them some support for providing us with, honestly, the best theme song we could have ever asked for 2.5 years. I said to Cameron, can we find communist lo-fi for our podcast? And then we found Toasted Tomatoes, and they have been our absolute savior for this podcast.
Very sad to see them go.
Well, we're not killing them, but we got a different song now. We didn't take him to the farm where we brought my dog as a child. He's still there.
He's still, just hanging out with Toasted Tomatoes now.
With Toasted Tomatoes.
Well, you will hear from us again soon in re-recorded episode, in re-released episodes, and also not too long in terms of fresh episodes. So hang around. Oh, and one last thing before we go, you may or may not know that we have merch. We've got mugs, t-shirts, tote bags, jackets. I quite like our sweaters. But going forward, because that's going to be reflecting an outdated title for the podcast, we're going to be taking those things down, unfortunately. So if you are interested in any of our current merchandise, which, hey, let me tell you, I'm getting my orders in because I, again, still love the branding, still am very appreciative of it. So we're going to be keeping it up through, I think, at least the first 2 weeks of June. So if you're interested, tipsytolstoy.com. There's the store on there. All right. See you soon.